Next from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz goes one-on-one with Ron Gidwitz, former Republican gubernatorial candidate who is now backing Bruce Rauner in the Republican race for governor. We hear Mr. Gidwitz discuss the Republican field and what he feels are the major issues facing Illinois. This runs about 30 minutes.
As I said, this is going to be a really, really good show because we have Ron Gidwitz here. Look, this guy's like a mega billionaire, something like that. He and his family go back to Helene Curtis. They sold that. He's a major investor. He ran for governor. He knows. Look, he knows the world of finance in Chicago. He knows who the money people are. He knows the influential folks. That's why he's known Bruce Rauner. So he can talk about that. He's not the spokesperson for Bruce, but Ron Gidwitz, you're somebody who knows Bruce Rauner, right?
I know Bruce Rauner, yes.
And you've known him for what? And what's your relationship? How would you put it?
I've known Bruce Rauner essentially in a social capacity.
Social capacity.
Social capacity. He's a friend. I don't do business with Bruce. I don't invest in Bruce's fund. Unfortunately, I wish I had invested in Bruce's fund. It's done extremely well.
How many conversations have you had with Bruce over the years, roughly, ballpark?
Jeff, I can't tell you how many.
15, 20, 100, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. You've talked to him seriously. It's a social thing, but you would talk to him and say, you might ask him about like who he likes for president.
No, I mean,
when in 2008, when there was a presidential race, did you ever talk about the presidential election with him?
I don't think I did. But I mean, Bruce and I have a number of interests in common. Education certainly being one, good government being another one. And so we've discussed that on a number of occasions.
What have you discussed about education? Because you know why people want to know, because, excuse me, when they see somebody running for governor, okay, they sometimes think maybe the person is pulling his punches a little bit. What they would like to know is, what did he say before he was running for governor? So when you knew him in 2008, as you did, how many years do you go back? Like 2000 or so? When did you first meet Bruce?
You know, Jeff, we are not. I'm not going to sit here and talk about what Bruce's platform, quite frankly.
His platform. I'm just saying, when did you first meet Bruce?
I've known Bruce, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, quite some time.
And you started talking education, because I know education,
well,
education has been a big interest of yours.
It's been an interest of mine for probably 30 years.
30 years.
And Bruce has been interested for quite some time.
10 or
He's been
15
engaged
years, right.
in charter school movement. He's been engaged in a variety of school reform efforts. He's worked with the various school officials here in
Chicago and elsewhere.
Yeah.
He's a big believer in competition for public schools. Would that be fair?
I think what Bruce, look, I can't speak for Bruce, as I just said, but Bruce is interested in is high quality schools, however you're going to get them.
And he's somebody in business. He's probably worth $700 million.
I have no idea.
You don't know, but I know. That's what's publicly stated. So we sort of refer to him as a billionaire. He may not quite be there. But the point is, and I don't say this in a negative way, some would, he's succeeded in business, hasn't he?
Bruce has been very successful.
Okay. And to do that, he describes himself as a salesman. And to succeed in business, he's competing, right?
Sure.
There are lots of people. He's somebody who manages wealth. You know, he manages essentially pension funds. He's done that work. He may have been involved as a venture capitalist. The point is, there are lots of people doing both of those things. I don't know which of those he does more. We'll hopefully have him on sometime. But those are very competitive worlds. You know, you don't need a license to be a wealth manager. What you need is skills, because people come up to you and say, you know, to practice law, you have to have a law degree, or I don't know that, but you have to have a license. You can't just hang up your shingle. But if you want to be a wealth investor, if you want to be a wealth manager, in most cases, you just hang up a shingle and people hire you or don't pretty much on how you perform, right?
Well, I think that's part of it, but by the same token, you also have to fulfill various obligations that the Securities and Exchange Commission
regulations
promulgate, which in many cases can be very stringent. To go out and solicit money, you've got to adhere to and be licensed, or have someone who is licensed sell for you. I mean, you just don't walk in off the street and say, here I am, give me money.
Right. But the point is, I was trying to get at, and maybe I didn't make it clear, if you're going to succeed, whether it's as a venture capitalist, which some people say he is, or a wealth manager, which some people say he is, you compete. And you have to be very competitive, and you have to appreciate what competition is about. The reason why I say that, because he seems to be a big supporter of charter schools, as you are. He seems to be a supporter of school voucher, school choice, which I know you are. And people who do that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Ron, people who support those things often say the reason why they support that is they believe in competition, and they believe competition and free markets are good when it comes to selling automobiles. More competition, get better automobiles. They think more competition, get better education. Did I get that right?
Well, I think that's one point of view. I can't speak for Bruce.
Is that your point of view?
I can only tell you
Is that your point
that
of view?
right now the public schools in too many of our communities don't work. The performance of our public schools are deplorable. We've got far, far too many youngsters who can't read, write, and perform at grade level. Right. And so then begs the question, what are the options? And I believe that it is immoral to keep youngsters in failing schools, overcrowded schools. They ought to be in some environment where they can learn, and there ought to be some assurance that when at the end of the day they'll have a sufficient education so they can go on and get a decent job.
And what do you recommend as the means to give these people? It sounds like you're saying they should have options to failing schools. Am I getting that right?
Totally.
And what options do you recommend, say, people have to the CPS where some might say 80% of those kids are not learning how to read at grade level. In a sense, the CPS is failing for 80% of those kids. If I got that right, what kind of options do you think CPS, Chicago Public Schools students should have?
Well, regretfully, one of the options that too many youngsters in our community take is they move to the suburbs, where the schools generally are significantly better than in Chicago. So you're left with an enormous number of youngsters who can't move. But for those that live in the city and don't move for whatever reason, there are the parochial schools. There are a limited number of non-sectarian private schools. Then we have charter schools as an option. And quite frankly, and you said it, I happen to think that vouchers is an alternative. We don't have them here yet.
You would like to see them.
But I do believe that if we can't put enough youngsters into the charter schools, into the private schools economically today, and vouchers would help that, as long as we've got a public school system which is failing.
And what do you mean? Why would vouchers help that? Explain to people.
Well, right now we're seeing the parochial schools, particularly the Catholic schools, which is the largest school system in Chicago outside of CPS, closing schools.
And what do you mean when you say vouchers?
Vouchers would be, for me, a $2,500 piece of paper that would cause a student to go to a private school, i.e. the parochial school or a private school, and be able to reimburse that school for $2,500.
And you must know that roughly the CPS budget, Chicago Public School budget, is about $6 billion. We have about 400,000 students in the Chicago Public Schools. If you divide one into the other, it means the average, and people can see that graphic, the average expenditure per kid per year in the Chicago Public Schools is $15,000. Now, some people say some kids are getting an education that's more expensive than $15,000, which would mean some are getting less. But on average, it's $15,000. And all you're recommending is that kids be able to take $2,500 or 1/6 of that and spend it at the school of their choice. Do you think it might be better to let them take the entire amount, all $15,000, and go to the school of their choice?
Let me just add one other particular statistic just to make it interesting. If you go to the State Board of Education's website and take a look at what the Chicago Public School System is spending on education, the average per capita expenditure is $8,700.
When you wait a second, you say 87. Are you counting state, local, and federal spending?
If you go to according to the State Board of Education, the Chicago Public School System is spending $8,700 on educational activities.
Oh, not counting capital costs, like building costs.
Not counting capital costs, not counting overhead costs, not counting not counting debt service, not counting.
If they included it all, it would be $15,000.
Oh, I understand. I'm not arguing with your number. I'm only saying that what's interesting is the amount of money that goes into the classroom.
Sort of the operating costs.
Is $8,700.
Well, shouldn't they be able to take at least the $8,700 and go to the school?
Well, that would be nice. But
would you recommend that?
I would, frankly, I would say take it, as you suggest, $15,000. But that's.
Have you ever talked with Mr. Rauner? Do you think he might?
I've never discussed the issue with him.
School vouchers.
I've never discussed
the issue. Well, I can
with
tell
him.
you, I think I've heard him say at forums that he supports school vouchers, school choice. He supports charter schools. He supports anything, virtually anything, that allows kids to have choices as alternatives to the public schools. He's not anti-public school, my understanding is. He's just saying for some kids, like kids who go to Peyton, go to Jones, to the select enrollment schools, they're doing pretty well. Select enrollment kids have to test into those schools. Only a small percentage get to go, but that they may cover like 12, 15%. The bulk of the kids, 85%, are either at charter schools or at traditional neighborhood schools, and he favors those choices. Okay.
Now, but just answer me one question, if you wouldn't mind, since we're now getting your opinion as opposed to mine. Why is it that we only have, 8 college prep test-in schools? Why aren't all of our high schools of a high enough quality?
You mean when you say college prep test-in, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's selective enrollment schools.
Oh, because, well, select enrollment is, I guess, the idea that you have some schools that people think you don't want to have too much heterogeneity. You can only keep these schools performing at a relatively high level if you have kids who have similar skills and abilities. Because if they don't, you're going to be having half the kids who you're trying to teach how to read because they don't know how to read coming into 9th grade, and half the kids are ready to do advanced
But why should we have that condition in Chicago where half the kids need to learn how to read by the time they get to 9th grade? It's unacceptable.
It is unacceptable, but the point is that's the reality. And I guess the question for people like, and Bruce we'd like to have here, so he can answer these questions, or Dan Rutherford. Haven't been able to get either. We have been able to get Dillard and Brady. Come to that in a second. But we'd like to have Bruce here, so you could ask, or I could ask on your behalf, that question to Bruce. And I think what Bruce would say, I don't know, he agrees with you. We probably shouldn't, he would say, we shouldn't have so many kids in 8th grade not reading at grade level. And he's about trying to change that, trying to give people choices. So in 3rd grade, they have a choice, so they can learn how to read at grade level. By the time they're in 8th grade, they could do what you want, perform at a high level. But Bruce, I shouldn't be guessing what you'd say. We should have Bruce Rauner here speaking for Bruce Rauner. Let's speak more broadly about the race, because you know a lot about this. As I said, you ran for governor yourself in the Republican primary in 2006. You were a businessman. Had you run for office before?
Nope. Okay. I take it back. Yes, I was ward committeeman.
Okay, ward committeeman. What ward was that?
43rd ward.
It's a good ward. Okay. But so you know something about a person who spends much of almost your entire life in the world of business, and then trying to make a transition into the political world, running for political office at least.
I wouldn't be quite so.
Okay. Whatever. The point okay.
I've been engaged in political activity since I was in college, running campaigns, working on campaigns.
Well, you were engaged, what you're saying, as a supporter of other candidates, even though you weren't running for office.
And I've been involved in the public arena for probably 30 years.
You had high-level positions from, was it starting with Mayor Richard J. Daley or Richard M. Daley?
Actually starting with Jim Thompson.
Oh, that was the first appointment that you had to a city position?
That was my first appointment to the World's Fair Authority, the one we never had. And then I was
You were at the Board of you were at the, was it State Board of Education?
But not till much later. I also was appointed by Harold Washington and reappointed to 3 terms as the chairman of the Economic Development Commission.
And then City Colleges of Chicago.
And then Mayor Daley appointed me.
Mayor Richard M. Daley.
Mayor Richard M. Daley appointed me to head the city colleges.
But you're a good example of this, because all of that time, you were a card-carrying Republican. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
And yet
I was a ward committeeman for a good part of that time.
And yet you were getting appointments from Democrats, going back to Harold Washington, who I guess you would say was an independent, but certainly a Democrat.
He was a Democrat.
Richard M. Daley, a Democrat. Anybody else?
Well, that's
Any other Democrats? We'll get to Republicans in a minute.
No, I think that might have been it.
And then you had appointments from Jim Thompson, who of course was a Republican.
Yeah.
So operating in the city of Chicago, if you wanted to have influence, in the best possible sense of the word, if you wanted to have a positive impact on public policy, you needed to work with Democrats as well as Republicans, because for a long time, we haven't had a Republican mayor in Chicago since, 1955, right?
I guess I would argue that if you want to be effective, not just in the city of Chicago, but in the state of Illinois, Jim Thompson, a Republican, worked with the state legislature that was populated by Democrats. Mike Madigan, for the, I believe, for the entire time Jim Thompson was governor, Mike Madigan was the speaker.
Okay.
And the same thing, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be the case in Washington right now, and as a result, we don't get people's business taken care of by our Congress.
All right, so people can look up at the screen now. We're giving them a broader view, and I'll tell you what they're saying, is they're saying the Republican primary gubernatorial candidates, a recent poll by We America.
We Ask America.
We Ask America. I said We America so people can change that in their head. It says We America poll. We Ask America. Thank you very much. That's why we have Ron. Ron is my able assistant here. Ron. And so the leading person in that poll was businessman Bruce Rauner with 37%, I believe. These are polls taken probably starting in December, but going through, I think, February, and they've consistently showed Rauner in the lead and Rauner's lead growing. In that particular poll, taken in last part of January, early February, Rauner had 37%, State Treasurer Dan Rutherford had 17%, Bill Brady 15%, and the Brady folks say I got that wrong. It was reversed. Maybe it's Brady with 17, Rutherford with 15, and then Dillard sort of picking up the end at 9%. And then I guess the rest is undecided or whatever. Okay, so that's sort of the lay of the land as of February 9th, 2009, excuse me, February 9th, 2013.
You got to get your year right.
It's the toughest part for me. Okay, so we have roughly 19 days left in February for this gubernatorial campaign, and then we have 18 days in March, so roughly 37 days to the election. Okay, and does that sound like the right numbers to you?
Yeah.
That's sort of where things are right now. Okay, and now we have a guy like Dan Rutherford, who's the state treasurer. Some would say is dead man walking due to allegations coming out of the state treasurer's office. Would that be fair?
I've not heard him being characterized as dead man walking.
Well, it's these are troublesome allegations, and he only has 37 days to deal with them. So put aside whether they're credible, put aside whether they mean anything. Just looking at it from the politics, and you know something about politics. If you happened to be state treasurer, you weren't, but if you were and you were running for governor, and you had 37 days left, and this came up maybe when he had 50 days left, somebody in your office makes allegations, which my sources tell me, Dan wouldn't say what they were, but I'm on the record. I was interviewed by local Fox, and I told them that my sources tell me those allegations involve both sexual harassment by a male employee, but also political power abuse. That is being essentially coerced to engage in political activity when the person is a state employee. Now, I'm not saying, and I don't know enough to know whether the allegations are true. I'm just saying these are the allegations that were made by the employee, and his lawyer has said that he would eventually file a complaint. Whether that's happened or not, it'll happen. My point to you is, what's that like if you've got that kind of political stuff going on and you're 37 days away from the office? What do you do if you're the governor? If you're the gubernatorial candidate, if you were Dan Rutherford and you were facing the situation I've just described, what would you do?
I can't speak, Jeff, to the allegations. I don't know. Okay. I don't want to actually engage in that. I think the reality is...
No, I'm just saying, how would you deal with it?
But I think that the reality is, here you have the leader in this race, Bruce Rauner, is at 37. He's been growing right along. And the other guys are basically dead in the water. And so I don't know what you do if you are someone
Why
other.
Is he growing all along? In your view, why do you think he's growing all along?
He's got a message that has some resonance with the voters. He has the resources to put the message before the public, and he's done it effectively.
Yeah, let's put that graphic up. I think it's graphic 52, because this is something we all know. You've heard of mom. Everybody's got a mom. For me, what mom means, it means M is for message, O is for organization, and M is for money. And that's essentially what you said. Bruce has a strong message. You said resources, that means organization, that means money, right? And the thing of it is, now, who were you supporting last time around in 2010?
Which time? I mean, primary or general?
In the general election.
Bill Brady.
And in the primary?
Kirk Dillard.
So you gave money to Dillard in the primary and then money to Brady in the general,
Oh, no,
right?
I chaired Dillard's campaign in the primary and chaired Brady's campaign in the
So you were out there raising money for these guys, aside from giving your own money.
I was raising money for them, and I was to some extent, I can't claim to be terribly effective on Brady's political strategy. I did have some input.
Well, he came within literally thousands of votes of winning the general election.
If they'd listened a little more, he would have won.
And what did he have to do to, just as an aside?
As an aside, he should have campaigned much more heavily up here in northern Illinois, which he didn't do.
Now he's doing that. He's got an apartment up here.
He had an apartment.
His daughter got married in Holy Name Cathedral. He's an upstater. He's an upstater now.
He had
and downstater.
He had an apartment then, and his daughter worked at Children's Memorial Hospital.
She didn't get married at Holy Name. Now she's been married at Holy Name.
Well, she wasn't married at the time.
All right.
So.
No, but all kidding aside, but here's the problem for these folks. Okay, you were a money guy for Dillard, you were a money guy for Brady, now you're essentially a money guy for RAUNER, who's got the money, and you're not only are you not giving your money to Brady or Dillard, you're also not asking other people who are money people to give, and this is the problem. Those guys can't get the money.
No, that's not the problem. The problem is that those guys don't have the message. I mean, we need a change in this state. Bruce RAUNER is the only of the four guys running for office that have a real message that we need to change.
What's
we
the
need
message?
to change. We need to change in Springfield.
Yeah.
We need.
He says turn Springfield upside down. He's got that little picture of. He's got that little thing of like a snowman of Springfield. Turn it upside down.
It gets back to the point that you were making
before. Did I get that right? That's the figure. Yeah.
Well,
he's turning it literally upside down.
It gets back to the point that we were talking about before. How can we tolerate the kind of poor performance in our school system? And it's not just here in Chicago, but it's across the state in virtually all of our urban areas. We have schools that are dysfunctional, and as a consequence, we can't find people to do the kinds of jobs that are necessary to be successful and to have a decent life going forward.
Right, and he says that. There's the thing. RAUNER, if you watch any of these forums that are happening, and he's not participating in all of them, but I've seen him at 2 or 3. He says he'll do 5, he may do more.
He's done, actually, I think he's done more, but that's beside the point.
But the point is, when he comes on and it's his turn to speak, he says there are 4 things I want to emphasize. He talks about term limits, which he's making an effort with others to put the referendum up so that people would have a choice in the 2014 election to vote for term limits on state legislators. He says it's about improving education. That's one of his other points.
Yep.
He says it's about keeping taxes low, spending low on the state spending, state tax size, and improving the jobs outlook and the economy. So that could be 4 or 5 points. That's what he says. And you know what, to be fair, what does Kirk Dillard say?
I don't know.
He says a lot about what things were like when he was chief of staff for Jim Edgar, and he also worked for Jim Thompson, but he focuses on the Edgar years. Low unemployment, they came in and they started with a deficit, turned it into a surplus, and he says, I was chief of staff, so therefore kind of give me credit. That's sort of it. He also talks about a destination, making Illinois a destination economy, but the point is you get kind of mired down there, like what is the message? And maybe it's because he doesn't have much money, so he can't hone the message, can't hone the organization, can't hone the resources.
Or maybe he doesn't have the capacity to lead this state effectively, given the issues and problems that this state is confronted with.
But you supported him just 4 years ago.
Sure, but having now had 4 years to consider it,
Okay.
I've made my choice.
Well, the same thing with Brady. Now, Brady, more than the other guys, he does focus a lot when he does on the message. He talks about jobs. He talks about making the economy better. And he actually says a lot of the same things about education that RAUNER does. Talks about charter schools, talks about competition, talks about supporting that Meeks bill, which was vouchers for the lowest performing kids in lowest performing schools. Right. So Brady actually, even though he doesn't have much money, he's probably, in my view, this is just my opinion, we try to be fair and balanced, but we're engaged in a discussion here. I think you could say Brady comes closest to RAUNER in articulating a straightforward message that's pretty close to Bruce.
Well, I mean,
and he says, this is the other thing, his selling point. Just saying what Brady says. He says, 1.8 million people already voted for him for governor. That's a big deal because they're kind of used. Those aren't just Republicans, those are independents. That was in the general election. Do you think that's an important point?
That last point, no.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those votes, regretfully, were, and I think you'll see it again this time, irrespective of who the alternative is to Pat Quinn.
Whoever the
general
Republican
election.
was, or whoever the alternative was,
people were fed up.
You have 2 choices on about general election.
People were fed up with Pat Quinn last time. Unfortunately, not enough people were
So it's like
persuaded.
anybody but Quinn, and they went with Brady. Your point, whoever was there was going to get a lot of those votes.
I mean, here we have a governor today who has the lowest approval rating of, I think, any governor now in the country.
So it's like a piece of cake, is what you're saying. Almost any of these four guys could win.
Well, I would hope that whoever is successful in the primary is successful in the general election, because we cannot afford to have 4 more years of Pat.
Now, and we didn't mention Treasurer Rutherford, who says one of his main points is he's the only one of the 4 who's won a statewide office, which is state treasurer. Is that persuasive to you?
That's probably not true, because the primary that Bill Brady won was statewide as well.
Well, no, he's won an office that was in the general election statewide.
It is true, yeah.
Is that persuasive to you, why he should be ahead of
No, I think the issue gets to be who's got the program that's going to make the difference to this state going forward. And as I can see, looking at this, all I see are one guy, Bruce Rauner, who has the capacity and the willingness to make the changes. This is not a guy that
capacity and the willingness to make what changes?
To make the changes in the state, to improve our economic condition, to fix our school system, to balance the state's budget, and to attract jobs to this state that we aren't doing today.
And to stay focused on that. Your point is, during the campaign, that's his focus. You're saying, extrapolating, if he gets to be governor, that's his focus, but you're also saying, and nobody knows this, does he have the ability to work with a Democratic State House? Almost surely that'll be the case. Democratic State Senate, 2 longtime powerful guys, Senate President Cullerton, Speaker Mike Madigan. Does he have the capacity to work with those 2 guys?
Well, I come back to, excuse me, if you look at the problems that the federal government has right now, it's because we can't get a Congress to work with the president, or if you will, the president won't work with the Congress, may well be more germane. If we don't have a state legislature that works with the governor successfully, we're going to continue to have dysfunction here.
So why do you think Rauner can do
besides, you need to have a plan, and unfortunately, this governor that's currently in place does not have a plan to really solve the state's problems.
Does Rauner have a plan?
I believe Rauner has
a
plan. We're going to let the campaign speak for that. I told you, but when we sat down, I'm not going to represent the campaign.
But you're persuaded he has a plan?
I am totally persuaded he has a plan.
And you're persuaded that Bruce Rauner, more than the other 3, can work with whoever the Democratic leaders are to get his legislation passed?
I am persuaded that he will be a successful governor.
Based on?
I am persuaded that he will be a successful governor.
Based on?
Based on my understanding and knowledge of Bruce Rauner.
Okay. We got to spend a few minutes on the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, because you are now, what's your position there?
I'm the chairman of the board of governors.
And how long have you been there?
It's a 2-year term, and I'm in the midst of my 2nd year of a 2-year term.
Why is that an important organization? We've
got 4 million youngsters who are, in most cases, disadvantaged.
This is around the country?
This is around the country. It's a national organization.
What ages are these kids in the Boys and Girls Club?
6 to 18. We have 4,000 locations around the country and around the world. We are on every military base where there are youngsters, both here and abroad. We've got about something more than 10% of our youngsters are military affiliated. And then we are in virtually every community down to and including Modesto, California in size.
What does the organization do? It's a nice name. What's the budget roughly?
Budget in the aggregate roughly $1.6 billion.
$1.6 billion.
Okay. You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.